fancy. I like that.
Isn't that, I started using it on my podcast because that way, because there's a lag when you hit go live and then you're just kind of sitting there and all of a sudden you're live. Yeah. So I hit the counter and then hit go, and then whatever it is, the counter stops. And so, yeah.
Nice.
We're getting fancy here at the Lambda Quadrant. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our This Queer in Trek panel. I am Stephanie, your moderator, and to my side, because I don't know left and right yet on my camera thing, I've been doing this long enough, you think, is Callie.
I don't know left and right sometimes in real life. And so
there you go. Oh, wait, but I am pointing in the right direction. That is Callie.
Also with me, Wedge.
Wedge. There you go. Podcat was here, but of course he's gone. So I don't promise if he's going to make another appearance. And of course, the lovely and talented Malissa Longo is also joining us today to talk about
that direction.
In case you guys couldn't figure it out yet, to talk about Queer Trek, because it is so important, and because Disco is coming this Thursday, and we are all excited to be heading back into the world of Discovery. So the first thing I wanted to start with, before we got into the now, is the past and Star Trek's attempts to address LGBTQ concerns, and that it took so damn long. Because for those of you that maybe don't go as far back as TOS, and I mean, even our fearless leader, Randy Frank, admits he is not a TOS guy.
Me either.
I know, but see, TOS was always trying to be socially conscious and make social commentary. They had the first interracial kiss. They really pushed the envelope.
Not actually. That's a common misconception.
Well, who did? I mean, I would vote for Days of Our Lives because Days of Our Lives
But the Kirk and Uhura kiss was not actually the first. It's like the first under some like really specific criteria, but it's not like the first overall.
The first. Oh, gotcha. But point being is that they tried, but even Gene admitted LGBTQ just wasn't gonna ever make it to air. So they didn't, they didn't do anything then. And then, 1987 when TNG came along, still, I think they really wanted to, but like most of the rest of everything until Discovery, it was all metaphorical. You had the episode The Outcast, which really did try to speak to it without speaking to it.
And stumbled very awkwardly into good trans commentary when it was trying to do gay commentary. And that's just, it's weird how that
So, how would you rate
it for me as a child?
Well, I was going to say, so is that like an A? Is that like an A for effort, or maybe a B for effort?
God, there's probably several panels worth of material to answer that question with. I will say, as a kid, it spoke to me as like, wow, those people are different, and I think they might be different in kind of the way that I am. And look how like Riker's ready to like burn down his entire career to protect this person. And so, I think I saw it when I was like 12 or 13. And so it was very meaningful to me then.
Right.
But of course, like learning the context later on that it was like they were going for queer commentary and it turned out to be trans commentary. And, there's some of it that doesn't age well. Like the fact that they say pretty specifically that like English doesn't have a gender neutral third person singular pronoun, and it has had since like the 13th century. So that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it's, for its time, it's meaningful, and it's falls short in several important ways too.
Quick hello to Yvette. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I
love you so much. Yay, Yvette.
So then we move on to Deep Space Nine, and the big thing that they thought they were doing. Jadzia Dax did Kissed a Girl, which was a big thing, but then you can kind of write it off because it was Curzon's former wife. So when they fell in love, it wasn't Jadzia Dax, it was Curzon Dax.
No, it wasn't Curzon.
It wasn't Curzon.
It was Curzon.
Oh,
I forget.
But it was one of her But it was a male.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Tarius. Yeah. I apologize. All right. So it was, but it was a male.
Yeah.
It was one of Dax's male hosts.
They were a straight couple
And then they did do the mirror universe with Ezri and the Intendant. And Callie, as you just pointed out,
the Intendant was
fluid.
Happy to get it on.
Yes. Oh yeah, the Intendant was but that was the mirror universe. So again, they were able to.
And that also plays into a very specific trope of the evil bisexual,
right?
That is, if like it's cool to be straight, it's cool to be gay, but if you're bi or pan or like some version of like non-monosexual, those characters are almost always like villains or evil or portrayed in some way as being like sneaky characters, and that's kind of a problematic trope of its own that the mirror universe definitely like leaned hard into, even in Discovery.
Right. Well, at least they kept that consistent. But I mean, Ira Stephen Bear even said in What We Left Behind that he knows that they fell short doing any sort of representation. But again, when you want to talk about accidental, like things that happen, happy accidents, I guess, Ezri Dax did become very important and spoke to the trans community. Which I don't think was anything that was intended, but it had to do with Nicole DeBoer's performance and the struggle that Ezri went through, the whole I don't want to be joined, and she didn't know who she was after she was joined. And that struggle really spoke to members of the trans community. But again, that wasn't the point.
Well, as a non-binary person, I think the most specific thing that I can say about my gender feels is that I feel like a newly joined Trill, gender-wise. So that's like, there's like very only other Star Trek fans can really understand the fullness of my gender feels.
So yeah, again, that's not how Ezra was written, but Nicole absolutely embraces that benefit that her character, was able to speak to the trans community in that way. And then Voyager, this is really easy. Skipping Voyager because nothing.
Well, and I will say, even there is subtext that folks have caught with 7 of 9 and asexuality.
Right.
But that's like very, very buried subtext. Like there wasn't really even stuff that super strongly hinted at that. That's just very, very buried in subtext and unintentional. But I do know there are some ace folks who look at 7 as representation, at least in some ways.
Right. And then we had Enterprise, which again did a couple of episodes that metaphorically spoke to the AIDS crisis. Silly me, forgot that episode title. And then there was Cogenitor, which a lot of people, look towards. But the one thing
Cogenitor is a dumpster fire of an episode. I hate it. And
okay.
Oh God. Ugh.
All right, moving on then. But the one thing that I will throw out there before we get off the Enterprise topic is the one thing that they did try to do that they got very cold feet on is that Malcolm Reed was actually supposed to be the first gay character in Star Trek. And Dominic Keating found out from a magazine article in the supermarket. They didn't even tell him. It just sort of leaked. And he would have been okay with it, but they got cold feet at the end and they decided not to.
Another thing I will say that I was really, really bummed about on our rewatch of Enterprise is early on, I don't remember the name of the episode because I'm not as super familiar with Enterprise as I am the others, but there's the episode, I can't remember if they're on Risa, but they're like on vacation, like on a vacation planet, and they make a quip that comes off as super transphobic.
2 days and 2 nights. It is the Risa episode. Yeah. It's towards the end of the first season.
Yeah, where they make like a super transphobic seeming joke about like not being able to tell someone's gender by looking at them. And that was like, I rewatched that and I was like, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the end of, that was towards the end of season 2. And I know that because it was also an underwear episode, but that's for another podcast for another time. I've mentioned it on my own podcast a couple of times about that being one of the underwear episodes. And then we moved to the Kelvin timeline, and this isn't about a love it or hate it. We're not specifically going to speak about the Kelvin movies, but they tried in Star Trek Beyond. But if you blinked, you missed it. When Sulu met his family on Yorktown, when they were having shore leave, and you see him get off, pick up a little girl, put his arm around his seemingly husband, and walk away. And then I remember being a cis person just sitting in the theater going, "Oh, that's really sweet," thinking that's a nod to George Takei and who he is and then I found out, not at that time, I just thought it was really sweet, but then I find out later on that George was like, no. George basically said, "I get what you're trying to do and I appreciate it, but you've got so many other characters out there. I am George, I am gay. Sulu was never written that way. Sulu couldn't be written that way." So he felt they should have left Sulu alone and introduced an entirely new gay character. And if you flash forward to Discovery, which was 50 plus years late, after the original track, we finally get there. No more metaphors, no more subtext. You get these two very handsome guys sharing a toothbrush, and ta-da, that they're a couple and they're together, which I thought was a great way to...
Sharing a toothbrush?
Were they sharing it, or were they just talking toothbrushes?
No.
It was like...
No, they were sharing a toothbrush.
They were brushing their teeth together. They were not
That's what I don't remember what it was. I just know it was a toothbrush episode. You know what's so funny is that... No, but see, this is a topic for another time, but I don't honestly see the problem of sharing a toothbrush with somebody if you're in an intimate relationship, but that's just me. Melissa's making a face, so I am taking Melissa doesn't... There you go. There's another topic for another time. Maybe when you come on my podcast, Melissa, we can talk about sharing toothbrushes. But
sure.
That's not the toothbrush scene where they were together, and again, it was organic to me, at least. It felt very organic. Like we're doing this, and this is how we're introing it. So this is where you guys get to take it from here, because you guys get to talk about, how that made you feel as members of the LGBTQ community, where it stands with you now. Like,
I've done a lot of talking already, Melissa. You go.
Well, I mean, I'm coming from a slightly, I don't know. I don't know that I have a a good a voice for this. Only because, yes, I do find both men and women attractive, but I've never lived under a label, if that makes sense. So it's for me. I thought the scene with Jadzia and Lenara Khan was beautiful. That scene has always stuck with me. So that stood out to me, even if people didn't think that it was a strong enough representation. And then I don't know. I don't know where I'm going.
Well, so for me, like the metaphorical queerness that we'd always seen in Star Trek existed under some kind of threat, right? Like nobody cared that Jadzia and Lenara would have been a queer couple, but their relationship was still taboo, and they were still like being forced to sacrifice something to be together, right? And so like, the queerness in whatever way was burdened by this threat of some kind. And specifically that toothbrush scene is like, oh, hey, wow, like just gay folks being gay and having this like fun, intimate moment that didn't exist under any kind of threat, any kind of stigma. Like these are just a couple sharing this beautiful moment together. And I think specifically that scene is something that I think that's the reason why that scene meant so much to so many people, because it was just so innocent. Like it obviously it's in the context of like the bigger story and the threats and the first season we're always being attacked by the Klingons and that kind of stuff. But like that moment, there was no tension really in that moment. It was just two people sharing this wonderful time together. And I mean, that's kind of the criticism that I have. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was real life. There wasn't any anything that it was meant to portray, except for two people who love each other, existing in the same space, and that everyday life. I mean, that's real. That's honest. So there's no reason to, think anything's wrong with it.
Yeah, and so that's like the criticism that I have of what Discovery has done is, and I want to be clear, like, this is not me saying that I think it's bad, but it's just a way that I kind of wish it might have been handled differently, is that all of the queer folks that we have met in Discovery thus far, at least that we're aware of, because I think Owo and Detmer are a couple, and no one will ever convince me otherwise. But pretty early on, Stamets and Culber's relationship becomes defined almost entirely by their trauma. Even like Gray and Adira's relationship is so much defined by their trauma. And one of the first things that we learn about Jet Reno is that her wife has died. And so, like, it's a tough balance to strike, right? Because they're living in this intense universe where intense things are happening. And, like, there wouldn't be a story if there wasn't conflict to resolve, right? But so many of these characters still do have conflicts tied specifically to their queerness, and that like strays very close to the barrier gaze trope about we fall in love with these queer characters and then something terrible happens with them specifically as a way to mess with people's emotions via the story. And like I said, it's a tough balance to strike. Like it's not me saying like, oh, it's terrible and they shouldn't have done that or anything, but it is something that I thought about. This idea that like so many of our gays are traumatized in ways that have to do with their queerness and not, because spoiler alert for season 3 of Discovery, like, Gray dies like 2 minutes after we meet him. You know what I mean? Like, and I wish I want queerness that isn't that way. Like I want queerness that isn't burdened by trauma specific to that person's queerness.
Well, and I was actually going to bring this up because it's something Frank and I have talked about on other shows. It seems like it's either the trope of being defined by your trauma, you get introduced to a queer couple, and then one of them is going to inevitably die. Mm-hmm. It's either that
the barrier gaze trope,
right? Yeah. Oh, it's either that, or they get stereotyped into like the best friend, and then they're a very stereotypical queer character that kind of like what you would expect a queer character to be. Yep. So from that side of things, at least, I think they're not doing that. These are queer characters that don't fall into the stereotype of queer characters that normally plagues television. Would you agree?
I think so. And that is, I do love that. And I do love the way the sort of recovery from that is being played out, especially in season 3. The idea that you lean on your found family to heal from all of the terrible shit that's happened to you. That is a thing that basically every queer person understands very, very deeply, right? Because even if your family is cool, a lot of times you have problems in life that your family can't understand if they're not queer themselves, and so you still have to seek out other queer folks to like work out that specific baggage. And so I think that's such a I don't want to say that anything is ever like fully universal, but I think the closest thing to a universal theme in the queer community is the idea of needing found family and leaning on found family, and those folks being the people that like really help you navigate the world in the context of like how different you are. And I think I have basically no notes on how that's played out so far. And I'm so excited to see where that comes, especially with the scene with where Culber is talking to Detmer in season 3. I forget which episode. And, you know, she's like realizing that she's got PTSD basically. And he's just so like loving and fatherly. And I think like most queer folks know at least one person who's like that and who has been that person for them. I certainly do. And that was just so meaningful to me to see that played out so explicitly, like that sort of dynamic that so many of us are familiar with. That and like I feel like that's because not only do we have queer characters being played by queer actors, like we have queers in the writers' room too, and queers on the production staff, and so like it kind of like trickles from the top down, right? Like there are people writing this that understand how this stuff works, people who are producing it that understand how this works, and then actors who know exactly what this feels like and then know how to play it right too. And I think that I credit that, you know, specifically for, because the actors can do a great job, but if they're playing material that was written from a misunderstanding of how these things work, it doesn't matter how good a job the actor does. If they're not working with good stuff to begin with, it can still feel a little weird, and it just did. And so I think that part of it was beautiful.
Melissa, do you have any, or do you have anything you would like to contribute? Add?
I agree about Detmer and I don't know how to say her name.
Owosakun.
Yes. Yes.
My darling Joanne.
I think they're a couple too. I see some chemistry there, and I'm like, that would be fun. That would be a fun, you know. I don't usually ship people, but I would them.
And to bring it back to kind of something that you said earlier, Callie, about the mirror universe, I loved the Empress when they pulled her through. But again, you know, the way she was coming on to Kubler, and, you know, like, well, what is it? Was he pan in her world? Is that what she said he was?
Oh, yeah,
fluid?
Stamets is pansexual in my universe. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, did that speak to you as the negative, as the whole, well, you know, she's from the mirror universe and she's trying to convert people that aren't?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely played into that trope because we didn't learn about, because I mean, I guess we don't know if Prime Universe Giorgio is queer or not, right? Because she didn't really live long enough for us to find out much about her life. But we don't. You know, it's played specifically as her, especially the way that she comes on to people is played as this sort of, like, I don't want to call it predatory because I don't think it's quite predatory, but it's like predatory adjacent.
It's like a power play.
Yeah. I do think that played into the like evil bisexual trope that felt like, you know, it wasn't like, oh, like, fuck this, I'm turning it off, but it was just like, they didn't have to do that. Like that. It was more like that kind of feeling for me.
I have a question. What are your thoughts about Seven and Picard?
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But again, with that, it feels because my understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure that I'm correct about this, is the moment that happens at the end of season 1 of Picard was not in the script. That was an ad lib. That was something the actors decided to do.
Yeah.
And then apparently they are now like going to run with it in season 2. And so I'm very, very glad that it happened. Mm-hmm. But also, like, the fact that, like, to get that moment, the actors had to be like, well, we're just going to do something that wasn't in the script and make it happen. Like, why did that have to be the thing that got us that? You know what I mean? It just feels like there's always that, like, there's always the asterisk of some kind that's like, oh yeah, man, this is great, but like, why did it take that to get this? You
know? Michelle, I met
thinking outside the box from other people who are contributing to, and like you said, it depending on who's in the writer's room, that's not maybe not where their head was going, but the actors, you know, always contribute somehow to
Mhm.
their character growth, which I think is great that they were able to do that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
good on
Good on them.
yeah.
Good on honestly, good on the writers and everything for not being as hardlined as they've been in, with the original 5 series, where that just never would have made it because oh my god, the actors did something that wasn't in the script.
Well, yeah, and I mean, also, like, I mean, I'm sure, just like anything else, they probably did a million takes of that scene, right? And they probably didn't do it in every one. And at some point, the production staff was like, "Well, that's the take we're going to go with," right? So, like,
right. Well, Hugo has some intel. We were all, let's put it this way: we were all at STLV, but we missed this panel. So it looks like it was a photo. It was based on a photo taken by Jonathan Del Arco.
Love that.
Go Jonathan. But yeah, again,
Nice.
yeah, but just like that goes a lot of credit to Star Trek for running with it, when with other shows it never would have made it to air. I actually got in an argument with somebody on Twitter, one of those stupid closed-minded people, about because it's pushing the agenda.
Yes, it is, and that's fine.
Right. But I just said, if they're gonna, but if they're gonna, it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. And you know what? If anybody is going to represent that sort of journey of figuring out who you are, it's going to be Seven.
Well, yeah, of course.
I mean, hello, she was figuring out who she was at the end of Voyager. So, and figuring out who you are, a lot of that includes your sexuality. So, I mean, there's
right, and it's never wrapped up in a neat little bow that at the end of a series. Of course, of course, it's gonna.
So we get to. I mean, one of the things I was excited about Picard was getting to see where Seven was now, because.
Right. And that she is like a revolutionary freedom fighter, and I just I love it so much. It fits her so well.
Yeah.
All right, what is Texas? There you go.
Yeah.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
I do love.
All right, Jesse.
When the trailer for season 2 of Picard came out, and there was that scene of I think it was Seven walking in front of Raffi, and then like the scenes where they're driving together, and like neither of them looked happy, and it's like every queer person recognizes exactly what's happening in this scene. Like, I'm so excited that they're like, I love you, but I'm so over your bullshit. Like, so like, oh my god, I'm so excited for it.
Yeah.
So where do you guys want to see them take this? I mean, obviously, Callie, they have some work to do.
Are we not going to talk about Lower Decks?
Oh God, yeah, no, absolutely. If you want to talk about Lower Decks, forgot about Lower Decks.
I desperately need to talk about my love, my disaster by love, Beckett Mariner.
Okay.
Because I swore up and down from the very beginning. I was like, she has disaster by vibes, and I don't even say that because like I don't think of myself as a disaster by, but I just like that isn't the entire vibe that I got from her, and then at first we have her and Tindy on the planet, and she's like yeah, like gender non-binary babes, and just says it very casually. And I was like, okay, like queer Mariner confirmed, cool. And then of course, spoiler for the end of season 2, her and Jennifer are doing and this is great, right? Because this is the enemies to lovers trope, the enemies to lovers TV trope, and we have like a trope that is unrelated to queerness being applied to queer people. And I don't know how intentional that was, but I love that it happened. I love, and I'm pretty sure Mike McMahon has said that we are going to see Jennifer and Beckett as a couple in season 3,
cool.
Which I'm very, very excited for. And I also love, I don't know how many people know this, but I saw Tawny Newsome talking about it on Twitter. The scene where she's like running through the corridor and she pushes Jennifer out of the way and she's like, move, Jennifer. That was improvisation. and like that wasn't in the script. And Tawny Newsome at the time had no idea that it was going to be an Andorian that she was pushing out of the way. And so Jennifer was just a name that came out. And that's how Jennifer got named Jennifer.
Oh my God.
And so I just think it is the funniest thing. So I love that there is the enemies to lovers thing, and it just happens to be about queer people. And you know, just like other the queerness is obviously like not treated like a big deal. It's just like, oh, hey, like I kind of like you. And then I also have to talk about the loves of my life, Matt and Kamalu, the gay horny space whales. Cannot get enough. And I also, and this is moving like out of what's explicitly on screen and more into like subtext and headcanon. But I have fairly strong feelings that Tendi and Rutherford are both ace. And this was something that my friend Sue from the Women at Work podcast mentioned that I didn't think about, because I'm not ace. I have a lot of friends who are. So
Callie, to interrupt you, in case anybody out there does not understand the acronym ACE.
It's not an acronym. It's a just shortening. ACE for asexual spectrum.
Okay.
But I just was kind of thinking out loud, and I was like, does anybody else get like asexual vibes from Tendi? And in Strange Energies, when you know she's like chasing Rutherford throughout the ship with the medical shotgun, there is, in other contexts, we would think that like Tendi is going after Rutherford that way because she's actually in love with him and she wants them to be together. But it's made very explicitly like she's worried about losing her friend. She's not romantically interested in him. She is worried about losing her friend. And my friend Sue pointed out, I don't want to take credit for this realization, but Sue was like, that's a thing almost every ace person has gone through, like the worry of losing a friend to a romantic relationship. And I was like, oh, that's right. Like I have many asexual friends who have said exactly that sort of thing. And so that's like reading into subtext. So I don't want to claim that as being, but it would fit, right? Because we know that Tendi is alienated from the rest of the Orions for some reason. And she's kind of gone out of her way to separate herself from the hypersexualized version of Orions that we're familiar with. So I would be very excited and completely unsurprised to find out that one of the reasons is that she just has no interest in the sexual side of things that Orions are generally associated with. So yeah, very excited about all of that.
I have a question.
Okay, first of all, there's somebody else that loves just citation ops as much as you do, I'm sure, Callie. And yeah, I want to mention something about Orions, but go ahead, Melissa, you can.
I am not familiar with the term disaster bike, so could you please?
Disaster bike is it's kind of a God, this is, you know how sometimes there are terms that you sort of intuitively understand, but you've never actually had to define out loud. And I think disaster bisexual is one of them. Just like a bi person who is just kind of like chaotic and a disaster of a person.
Oh, okay. That's really what it comes down to.
Right.
For the Cetacean Ops fans, my first ever Star Trek tattoo is the Cetacean Ops logo. It's
that's so cool.
Now. Very excited.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, that is very cool. Just real quick, for anybody that doesn't watch Enterprise, and I've always thought that this was really interesting, because again, you know, we're talking like the early 2000s as opposed to 1966 when we were first introduced to the Orions. They're Bound. See, look, I can't remember episode names. Bound, which was a 4th season episode of Enterprise, kind of let everybody in on the secret. That yes, they were called, you know, the Orion slave girls, but it turns out that that's just a cover. That the women actually run the Orion syndicates, and we saw a little bit of that in Discovery, that they're not using their sexuality as slaves per se. They actually use it as a power play and their pheromones and everything. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. Like they were trying to pull away the powerless slave girl mentality that came with them from the early days of Star Trek. And Enterprise thought, well, we can't. I liked how they maybe they probably did fall short again, but at least, because they're like, we don't want to change the whole species, but at least let us show them that the women were actually the ones in power, and this whole thing was just kind of a masquerade. And I was
it's just a switch of perspective, really.
Right.
I mean, you're looking at it from a different perspective.
Right. Which, and again, I think they were trying to erase a lot of the stuff that the 60s did, because we all know that 60s Star Trek fell very short when it came to anything female related, because it still fell into a lot of the stereotypes of the time.
And I think, something that I understand is tough to do in a TV show is Star Trek has a long history of painting alien species as monoliths in and of themselves, right? Because like originally a lot of the Star Trek aliens were meant to represent certain specific groups of humans, right? Like the Klingons were supposed to be the Russians and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we have just barely scratched the surface of moving away from that like species as monolith thing. And like you were saying about the Orions, right? Like I don't think like you shouldn't have to flip that entire dynamic on its head to do that, right? Like you could just very easily say that like, oh, it's actually not like that everywhere. Like there's a certain there's a certain section of this culture that is like this, but if we move to this other city, it's like that. Which we got a little bit of it with the Klingons in Discovery, which I thought was really cool. We got to meet. They went to the planet where we it became canon that Barack Lowell is not just for internal organs, to keep it family friendly. If you get what I'm saying. They have two of everything.
All right. Well, we've got a couple of comments from the audience I wanted to share.
Oh yeah, that's that's a very ace feeling. So speaking of good observations. Sorry.
Yay!
Yeah. Billups being ace. That's another sort of interesting thing. And I don't know. I always try to couch things in terms of like being specific about like I'm speaking outside of my personal experience here because I'm not ace, but I have enough ace friends and I'm familiar enough with the discourse that I'm just like, oh yeah, I see what you mean there. Billups is ace, but at least at first it's presented as it's not because he is ace inherently, but he just can't have sex because he doesn't want to become royalty of his planet, right? It's not that like he inherently doesn't want sex, that he is inherently an asexual person, but he's made an active decision to be asexual for this specific reason. But then when he's like in the bedroom and like can't get it up.
Right.
Oh, wow, he is maybe inherently ace. And that like, again, who knows if this was intentional, right? But that does bring up a really, really good point about, how much of our identities are inherent to us versus how much of them are a product of social conditioning and like the world that we grow up in, right? Because I know, for example, and this is just barely scratching the surface, so I'm hesitant to say it, but it's important. I know at least 2 people in my life are asexual, specifically because they used to be sex workers. And they're just like,
wow,
doing sex professionally ruined the fun for me, so I'm not interested in it anymore. Just like,
wow.
I used to run a recording studio, and that ruined the joy of recording music for me, so I don't want to do it anymore,
Well, because here's the
thing.
This is what Jesse said: living in chastity.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And is that? I mean, is there a difference between choosing to be chaste and choosing and being asexual. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because chastity is either something that typically, anyways, is socially imposed upon you because of some like moral virtue, or a choice that you're making for yourself because for some sort of moral reasons, not necessarily because you lack an inherent interest in it.
But could one lead to the other? I mean,
for sure.
Like Phillips, for example, is chaste by choice, which could have led to his,
yeah, like I've made it 30-some, 40-some years without it. I don't see what the big deal is, and it's fine,
Right.
And that's and that's just as valid. And that's, I think there is in the very surface level discourse about queerness in our society, I think we obsess a little bit too much about whether or not someone is born queer versus somebody chooses to be something else or another. Like it's, it's only a valid thing to be if you're born that way versus, if say I woke up one day and decided to be gay, does that make it not okay? And that's a hard thing to parse out the difference between, especially, in a panel of the scope of this, right? But I only tangentially Star Trek related. I make a podcast called Queer Splaining, and I bring this up because I had somebody on the other day who had a really great insight on this, and I think it speaks to this discussion. And they were like, a lot of our feelings about gender, and when I say our, I mean a lot of people in the trans community, there is this inherent sense of who you are or aren't, but some of it also is a reaction to the politics of gender and being like, no, fuck that. I want to opt out of all of that, right? Like that is not the only reason that non-binary works so well for me as a label, but it is one of them. All of the gender politics that we're forced to live with, I just want to opt out. And so I'm just not even going to play the game. And so, so in a way it is something that I inherently am, right. But also but it is also in some ways a reaction to the way that I grew up and the way that I was conditioned around about gender in the culture that I grew up in. And right. There's a complex interplay between all of those things that, is a lot more complicated than like right. Trying to, like, oh, wait, we found the gay gene, like that's.
Right. Again, like with most things in life, it's a gray area. There's not one definitive yes or no. This is the way things are. This is how it happens. Answer.
All right, I got to do a shout out for Enterprise because Jesse brought up a very good point about denobulins being polyamorous.
Also polyamorous. Shout out to my polyamorous folks.
And I'm just putting this up there for the hell of it because it's nice to have other Enterprise fans. But yeah, I mean that's I think that's one of the things Enterprise did, and I understand that there are a lot of issues with cogenitor, but I think one of the big takeaways I think about it is about forcing your personal cultural mores on other people is just not cool. It's and how T'Pol through the entire 4 seasons was always like, what did it she said to Trip and Broken Bow? You have to look at it subjectively. I think I always get subjectively and objectively, but she said subjectively. You have to look at other people subjectively. You can't force yourself on them. Right. And I think that's always.
Which one was progenitor?
Cogenitor. It's Cogenitor was the Enterprise episode where they met this really amazing species and they were all really friendly, and then Trip basically fucked everything up when he found out that there was a third gender that they needed to help get them pregnant, and there were like about a third of the population, and they were treated as non-people, for a lack of a better term. Yes. And it bugged Trip to the point where he completely interfered with it. But
Yeah.
as messed up
Yeah.
as everything is, the fact that
What-
T'Pol kept telling him don't interfere.
And that's the and I feel like that maps to some really important discourse that's happening around a lot of these things, right? Is that I think there is this impulse to be like, well, these people are suffering and I want to help. I don't know anything about their culture, but I know what human suffering looks like, and I want to stop that human suffering from happening, right? But I think that so rarely comes with the perspective of like, I don't have the range to assess this situation.
Right.
Especially, you know, in the United States, as you know, growing up in the cultural context where whiteness is at the center of most things, maleness is at the center of most things, being straight and being cis, and even being like, you know, evangelical Christian, like all of those things are kind of at the center of our thinking. And even even lots of us who aren't those things are still conditioned to accept all of those things as being the default and anything else as a deviation from that, right? And so many people still approach things where it's like, okay, maybe this is a legitimate problem, but they approach solving that problem still with that white-centeredness, male-centeredness, that attitude at the center of everything. And you're still going to fuck things up even if your intentions are good. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's where people talk about, you know, decolonizing your mindset, right? Because that what it comes back to is imperialism, colonialism, this idea that our culture is the center of everything and the best of everything, and we have to spread that out everywhere, you know. So, you know, somebody in the comments was saying like Tripp just wanted to help. He was right, but his interference had disastrous consequences, and that's I think the nuance there is that. In the same way that I might sometimes argue that the Prime Directive is not great, is that like this species is going to go extinct because a volcano is about to erupt. If you can stop that volcano from erupting and help a species not go extinct, that's probably okay. Like we should probably do that, right? Like that's a thing we should certainly do. But that's a lot different than trying to like jump in and map your culture onto someone else's before you know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and that's kind of like one thing that Mary Chifo brought up in a panel on a previous virtual TrekCon was that a lot of people go in view Klingons from a human perspective, but they're Klingons and they're not going to think the same way that humans do. So you can't impose human culture onto Klingon culture and expect it to match up. And that's the same thing that Tripp was doing in Cogenitor when he was trying to help. He was coming from a good place, but it also wasn't his place to change their culture. I mean,
Yeah, and again, I mean, Broken Bow spoke to that too, the first episode of Enterprise, because they'd never seen a Klingon. And Archer's going, why are you going to take him off life support? And the Vulcan's like, because he can't go home. Like, you don't send a Klingon on life support home. That's not how that works. You would do it for a human, but you can't do it for a Klingon. And, you know, and that was like the first, and again, that's just one of the reasons why I loved Enterprise, was just because watching humans try to learn these lessons, which we, in the now, still really need to learn.
We need to learn them. Yes.
We really
well, and there's also just the idea of like getting your own house in order before you try to tell other people what they need to do, right?
Right.
Like, which is, you know, there's often that is like a shitty deflection away from legitimate criticism, right? But often that is true, right? Like, you know, as, for example, like as a white queer person, like if there are if there's discourse happening among the Black queer community, it's not my place to like jump into that discussion and have opinions and try to tell people what to think and do, right? Because like as a white person, it's more my job to do what I can to make the white queer community less racist. You know what I mean? Because as a white person, even as a maybe more culturally aware white person than average, like I'm still unlearning all of this stuff. And I know all of the other people around me are still unlearning this stuff too. And so it's not my place to jump into the middle of that discussion as if I know what the right thing is, or I am the person to be leading that discourse, because I'm just not, right?
Right.
And so there's an awareness of your positionality in certain things that I think is really truly lacking in, you know, the idea of like time and place. Like I saw somebody on there's somebody I follow, and I'm gonna forget their username, but they make amazing Star Trek art. And this person had made a beautiful digital painting of Kayla Detmer, and this guy like thought that was the time for him to like comment about his criticisms of Star Trek Discovery. And it's like, there's a time and place for that discussion. This is not it.
Right.
Your opinion is not automatically relevant just because you have it. You know what I mean? Like there's a time and place discussion to be had, and I think that's also a part of this discourse that often gets missed.
Well, and I think it also goes to like being an ally, and that's something that I can speak to. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. And one of the biggest things that I've tried to learn is when to keep my mouth shut, and when not to say, or when to sit there and go, as badly as I want to support whatever it is I want to support, this might not be my time, or I defer to the rest of the Lambda Quadrant crew to educate me. Because you just have to learn, you know, again, just because your intentions are good. I just heard this great quote last week. Your intentions might be good, but we are our actions. So it doesn't matter what you intended. It's what you do with those intentions and the outcome.
Well, and there's even, I mean, there's a little bit of nuance to that, right? Because intentions matter, for example, in who I give a second chance to. Right? Like if you screw up massively, but I know your heart's in the right place, then you're going to get a chance. But if you screw up massively because I know you're an asshole, then we're done. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not that intentions are entirely irrelevant, but they're definitely a lot less relevant and important than a lot of people think they are. We like to measure. We often measure the impact of others' actions where we measure our own intentions. And that's where a lot of like incongruity happens. So yeah,
because you can't read somebody else's mind. But listen, we are butting up to the end of the hour. So real quick, let us get to hopes for representation in the upcoming shows, which there are many.
Get more gay space whales. I want more gay space whales.
Aren't they dolphins?
They are beluga. They are beluga whales.
They're beluga whales.
Yep.
Okay.
No, honestly, I love. I would just love to see more queer relationships that aren't traumatic because of their queerness. I definitely want to see that. I want to see people who might be stereotypically mistaken as masculine for I want to see like non-binary representation of that kind. I want to see especially bisexual men. I want to see bisexual men because I think there's a trope of bisexual women being, you know, the experimental, less virtuous, more promiscuous, which like there's nothing wrong with promiscuity, but society thinks there is, kind of thing. Yeah, I'm really happy with the direction things are going in. And also shout out to Zero from Star Trek Prodigy for being a genderless energy being, which is also kind of, I feel like, my
wonderful.
gender.
Right. And
and also in, not on the show, I don't think yet, but in the social media stuff, Zero has been referred to with singular they, and that makes me very, very happy.
And it's Rock, right? The
Rock Talk.
Rock Talk. I did that kind of flip, like they appear masculine.
She had sort of a stereotypically like masculine kind of growl, and then became, I would like to boldly go. Oh, I love her. I love her so much.
So cute. She is so cute.
Malissa, what are your thoughts and hopes for representation coming up?
I like the direction Trek is heading with this, and I think that I just want it to feel authentic and not, I don't know how to say it. I like where it's going. The reason I like the idea of Seven and Rafi is because that relationship does feel genuine, does feel like it organically grew. And I want to see more of that, just like with Detmer and you guys can say her name.
Well. I leave that up to Callie. Totally leaving that up to Callie.
Yes, I would love to see something happen with that too, and I do like the idea that Callie brought up of the masculine bisexual, because I've not seen a whole lot of that either. So.
Okay, so we're gonna, as a big thank you, and just because we can, let's promote ourselves, because it's very important that we love everybody that showed up. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it. Melissa, who is an incredibly talented artist, in case there's actually anybody joining us that does not understand that, Walking Art made by Melissa.com is some place where you can check out all of her amazing, mostly Star Trek themed. I'm not going to say all, because I think, but mostly Star Trek.
Yeah, I would say it's about half and half.
Oh, is it? Okay. Half and half. Just from t-shirts to jewelry to just everything that is artistic and beautiful. Head over to Walking Art made by Melissa and go check that out. Callie, where can we listen to your wonderful podcast?
It's called Queersplaining, and you should be able to find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, it should be in all of the places. It's been every place I've ever looked. So you should be able to find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Well,
there you go. A couple final comments. We love aha moments.
Yes, we love personal aha moments, and especially if you're comfortable sharing your personal aha moment, even privately. Love to hear about those. So hit us up, shoot us a message.
Yep. Shoot us a message. You can find us all over the socials at Lambda Quadrant. We made that really easy. There you go, Melissa. You got one fan, but yeah, hit Lambda Quadrant. Oh, of course, Anne Marie.
Wedge, what would you like to promote, buddy? Wedge, what do you want to promote?
Oh my God.
Himself and his cuteness.
Yes.
Wedge needs an Insta. That's all.
He's like, I want to promote everyone giving me treats.
There you go. And one last, just enough time for me to squeak in. NX7062 is my podcast. It's live on Monday nights. We talk about whatever the hell I think about talking about that's Star Trek related. All you Enterprise fans, 99% of the time I will figure out some way to get whatever discussion we're having turned around to something Enterprise related. I think every show, if it's even just my background, every show has something to do with Enterprise, including the fact that I named it NX7062, and I'm on YouTube and Twitter and Insta. You can find, or not Insta, YouTube and Facebook. And
I love that energy, because that's exactly how I am about Deep Space Nine. Everything is related to Deep Space Nine in some way, I promise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, of course.
Because everything's related. Honestly, you can pretty much bring everything around to Star Trek, but I work extra hard to bring everything around to Enterprise. So that's how that goes. Melissa's actually joining me a week from tomorrow, the 22nd. Melissa's joining me on my podcast. We're just going to be talking about art and Star Trek and Discovery and all that fun stuff because the premiere of Discovery is this Thursday. And in the last 8 seconds, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody out there, as I like to say and end everything, live long and prosper.
Woo!